She doesn't lose interest because of your age. She loses interest the moment you start acting like you're apologizing for it. Let me tell you something most men are never told out loud. Younger women are not repelled by older men. They are repelled by behavior, and some habits, often done unconsciously, quietly destroy attraction faster than any wrinkle ever could. I'm speaking to you as a female psychologist, not to flatter you, not to shame you, but to expose patterns I've watched repeat for decades. Men come into my office confused, frustrated, saying the same thing in different words. I don't understand. She was interested, and then she pulled away. What they don't realize is that attraction didn't disappear suddenly. It leaked out slowly through habits they thought were harmless. The first habit that kills attraction is this: over-explaining yourself. Older men often feel the need to justify who they are. They explain their career choices. They explain why they're divorced. They explain why they like what they like. They explain their past as if they're on trial. To a younger woman, this doesn't feel like maturity. It feels like insecurity dressed up as honesty. Attraction thrives on grounded certainty. When you explain too much, you silently tell her, "I'm not fully comfortable standing in my own story." Younger women, especially emotionally intuitive ones, feel this immediately, even if they can't articulate it. Confidence is not loud. It is calm. It does not rush to defend itself. The second habit is trying to impress instead of trying to connect. Many older men believe their value lies in what they can provide, so they lead with accomplishments, resources, experience, or status. They talk at her, not with her. They forget that attraction isn't built through resumes. It's built through presence. Younger women don't want to feel managed, lectured, or handled. They want to feel seen. When you perform instead of engage, she feels like an audience, not a partner. And when a woman feels like an audience, attraction fades because desire needs participation, not observation. The third habit is subtle, but deadly: talking down to her without realizing it. This doesn't always come from arrogance. Sometimes it comes from habit. You correct her stories. You finish her sentences. You explain things she didn't ask to be explained. You assume innocence where there is intelligence. From her perspective, this doesn't feel protective. It feels dismissive. Younger women already fight to be taken seriously in the world. If they feel even a hint of condescension from a man they're dating, their nervous system shifts into defense. Desire cannot exist where there is subtle disrespect. The fourth habit is rushing emotional depth before trust is built. Older men often value emotional openness, and that's healthy, but timing matters. When you share too much too fast, especially unresolved pain, it places emotional weight on her before she's ready to carry it. She doesn't think, "He's deep." She thinks, "This feels heavy." Emotional intimacy must grow organically. When it's forced, it feels like pressure. Attraction requires safety first, not emotional flooding. Now listen carefully to this one, because it's rarely acknowledged. Trying to be young instead of being grounded. Younger women are not attracted to older men who try to compete with younger men. They're attracted to men who embody stability, clarity, and self-knowledge. When you chase trends, mimic slang, or try to prove you're still one of the guys, it creates cognitive dissonance. She's not looking for a time traveler pretending to be 25. She's drawn to a man who is fully at home in his age, his energy, and his direction. Authenticity is far more seductive than imitation. The sixth habit is seeking validation from her instead of offering leadership. This shows up as constant checking. Is this okay? Do you like this? Am I boring you? While politeness matters, chronic validation-seeking signals emotional instability. Younger women are often emotionally perceptive. They sense when a man's self-worth depends on their approval, And when that happens, attraction flips into responsibility. Desire dies the moment she feels like she has to reassure you. And finally, the habit that quietly ends everything: resentment disguised as humor, jokes about girls these days, comments about her generation, subtle digs framed as teasing. Even when said lightly, these remarks create emotional distance. She hears criticism where you hear humor. Resentment poisons attraction because it signals unresolved bitterness. Younger women want a man who has made peace with his past, not one who carries it like a weapon. Here is the truth: you were never supposed to hear this clearly. Attraction is not about age, it's about emotional posture. Younger women respond to men who are centered, curious, respectful, and internally solid. Not perfect, solid. If you remove these habits, you don't become more attractive by trying harder. You become attractive by subtracting insecurity. Before you go on, ask yourself this quietly: which one of these habits felt uncomfortably familiar? Hold on to that thought, because what you do with that awareness determines whether attraction grows or quietly disappears. There is something deeper happening beneath these habits, something most men never slow down enough to see. Younger women are not reacting to what you do as much as they are reacting to what your behavior reveals about how you see yourself. And this is where many older men lose their power without realizing it. One of the most damaging patterns I observe is living in your past instead of standing in your present. This doesn't mean talking about your life experience is wrong. It means anchoring your identity to who you used to be instead of who you are becoming. When your best stories are always behind you, she doesn't feel inspired. She feels like she's being asked to admire a chapter that already ended. Attraction flows toward direction. Younger women are drawn to men who are moving forward, not reminiscing. When she senses that your emotional peak already passed, her desire struggles to imagine a future with you. Not because she's shallow, but because attraction is forward-looking by nature. Another habit that quietly kills attraction is confusing emotional availability with emotional dependence. There is a difference between being open and being needy. Emotional availability says, I'm connected to myself, and I can connect with you. Emotional dependence says, I need you to regulate how I feel. Younger women, especially those who are psychologically aware, detect this instantly. When your mood rises and falls based on her attention, texts, or tone, she doesn't feel chosen. She feels responsible. And responsibility is the enemy of desire. Attraction cannot breathe when it feels like a job. Then there's the issue most men never want to hear: trying to lock her down too early. This doesn't always look like commitment talk. Sometimes it looks like subtle possessiveness, monitoring her schedule, wanting constant updates, becoming uneasy when she has a full life outside of you. This behavior often comes from fear, not control, but intention doesn't change impact. To a younger woman, this feels like emotional confinement. Her independence is part of her identity. When she senses that being close to you requires shrinking her world, her nervous system pulls away. Attraction needs freedom to exist. Pressure suffocates it. Let's talk about another uncomfortable truth: sexualizing too soon or too heavily. Many older men assume younger women want overt desire as validation, but premature sexual intensity often signals emotional impatience. When desire isn't grounded in respect and timing, it feels transactional rather than magnetic. Younger women don't want to be consumed. They want to be chosen. There's a difference. When sexual energy shows up before emotional safety, it creates imbalance, and imbalance never sustains attraction. Another habit that slowly erodes interest is failing to adapt emotionally. Experience can become rigidity if you let it. Statements like, "This is just how I am," may sound confident, but they often signal emotional stagnation. Younger women value growth. When you resist reflection, feedback, or change, she doesn't see strength, she sees limitation. Attraction grows where there is evolution. A man who is still learning is infinitely more appealing than a man who believes he already knows everything. Now listen closely, because this one cuts deep. Using money, stability, or generosity as leverage. Providing is not the problem. Expecting gratitude, compliance, or affection in return is. Younger women are especially sensitive to power imbalance. When generosity feels conditional, even subtly, it triggers emotional withdrawal. True generosity is quiet. It doesn't keep score. The moment she feels bought instead of desired, attraction collapses. Desire must be freely given or it turns into resistance. Another overlooked habit is testing her instead of trusting yourself. Some men create emotional push-pull, withdraw attention, or provoke jealousy to see how she reacts. This may come from dating advice, but psychologically, it signals insecurity. Healthy attraction doesn't need manipulation to survive. Younger women, especially emotionally intelligent ones, see through this quickly. What they feel isn't intrigue, it's exhaustion. Games drain desire because they replace authenticity with strategy. And then there's the habit almost no man recognizes in himself: self-betrayal to keep her interested. You say yes when you mean no. You tolerate behavior that bothers you. You overextend your time, energy, or resources. On the surface, this looks generous. Underneath, it looks like fear of loss. Here's the paradox. When you abandon your boundaries, she doesn't feel grateful. She feels unsafe. Boundaries signal self-respect, and self-respect is the foundation of attraction. Let me tell you something very important. Younger women are not looking for perfection. They are looking for emotional congruence. When your words, actions, and energy align, attraction feels natural. When they don't, it feels unsettling. You don't lose attraction because you're older. You lose attraction when you stop standing fully in yourself. Here is the shift most men never make. And the moment they do, everything changes. Younger women are not deciding whether to like you. They are deciding whether they feel safe expanding around you. Safe to be feminine. Safe to be curious. Safe to be attracted without losing themselves. And many older men unknowingly block this by carrying unresolved emotional weight into the connection. Let's talk about emotional residue, past betrayals, divorces, rejections, years of disappointment quietly stored in the nervous system. When this residue is unprocessed, it leaks out, not through words, but through tone, reactions, and assumptions. You flinch emotionally when she doesn't reply fast enough. You read disrespect where there is none. You brace for abandonment before it even exists. She feels this tension, and when she does, attraction turns into caution. Younger women are not running from your history. They are responding to how alive it still is inside you. One of the biggest attraction killers is projecting your past onto her future behavior. You assume she'll leave because someone else did. You assume she'll lose interest because others have. You assume youth equals instability. These assumptions quietly shape how you show up: more guarded, more controlling, more anxious. She hasn't done anything wrong, yet she feels judged for crimes she hasn't committed. An attraction cannot grow where someone feels pre-blamed. Another deeply damaging habit is mistaking calm for boredom. Many men believe attraction must feel intense, dramatic, or charged at all times. When things feel peaceful, they worry, they poke, they provoke, they overtalk. They introduce unnecessary emotional movement just to feel something. Younger women, especially those who have experienced chaos, are drawn to grounded calm. When you disrupt that calm because you're uncomfortable with stillness, you teach her that peace with you is unstable. Desire thrives in emotional safety. not emotional noise. Let's talk about energy imbalance, because this is critical. Attraction is energetic before it is logical. If you are always leaning in, always initiating, always adjusting yourself to her rhythm, the polarity collapses. She begins to feel chased instead of drawn. Masculine energy, regardless of age, is about steadiness, direction, presence. When you orbit her instead of standing in yourself, attraction loses its tension. Desire needs space to move toward you. Another pattern that quietly repels younger women is confusing honesty with emotional dumping. Honesty is clarity. Dumping is release without containment. When you share pain without having processed it, you unconsciously ask her to hold it for you. That is not intimacy. That is transfer. Younger women may listen, they may care, but internally, their attraction starts to weaken because the dynamic shifts from partner to caretaker. Desire cannot survive that shift. There is also the issue of over-accommodation. You change your schedule for her constantly. You drop priorities. You become overly flexible. On the surface, this looks considerate. Psychologically, it communicates lack of structure. Structure creates safety. A man with a full life is attractive because his interest feels chosen, not desperate. When you make her the center instead of inviting her into a centered life, attraction loses its grounding. Now listen carefully, because this is where many men misinterpret female psychology. Younger women are not testing you. They are sensing you. They're not asking, will he impress me? They're asking, does he know who he is? When your identity is solid, you don't rush, force, explain, or prove. You respond, you choose, you allow things to unfold. That creates emotional spaciousness, and attraction lives in that space. One of the most overlooked attraction killers is inconsistency disguised as mystery, pulling back suddenly, becoming distant without reason, reappearing with intensity. Some men believe this creates intrigue. In reality, it creates distrust. Younger women value emotional coherence more than excitement. When your behavior doesn't match your words, her nervous system stops relaxing. And when relaxation stops, desire follows. Another uncomfortable truth: trying to mentor instead of relate. Experience is valuable, but unsolicited guidance feels patronizing. When you constantly teach her how the world works, how relationships work, how she should think, you place yourself above her instead of beside her. Attraction grows in equality of presence, not hierarchy of wisdom. She wants to feel met, not managed. And finally, there is the habit that quietly ends everything without a conversation: emotional unavailability disguised as strength. Some older men believe being reserved, distant, or emotionally minimal makes them appear powerful. What it actually does is signal disconnection. Younger women want emotional access, not emotional coldness. Strength is not absence of emotion. Strength is the ability to feel without being overwhelmed by it. Here is the truth you need to hear clearly. Attraction is not something you convince a woman to feel. It is something that emerges when she senses alignment between your inner world and your outward behavior. When you are emotionally present, grounded, and at peace with yourself, age becomes irrelevant. What she feels is orientation, the sense that being near you expands her rather than constrains her. Now we arrive at the truth most men never integrate, not because it's complex, but because it requires responsibility without blame. Younger women do not decide attraction with logic. They respond to how they feel in your presence over time, and that feeling is shaped by one question they are unconsciously asking every moment they're with you. Does being close to this man make me feel more like myself, or less? Everything you've heard so far points to this. Attraction dies when a woman feels she has to manage your emotions. It dies when she feels smaller around you. It dies when she feels pulled into your past instead of invited into your present. But here is the part that should give you relief. Attraction grows naturally when you stop trying to control outcomes and start embodying emotional leadership. Emotional leadership does not mean dominance, it means self-regulation. When you don't panic at silence, when you don't rush to define things, when you don't overreact to uncertainty, when you don't collapse inward when she pulls back slightly. Younger women watch this closely, not to judge you, but to decide if your nervous system is one they can safely relax into. One of the most attractive traits a man can possess at any age is emotional containment. This means you can feel desire without acting impulsively, interest without clinging, affection without ownership, confidence without arrogance. When you can hold your emotions without spilling them onto her, she feels safe leaning in. Safety is what allows attraction to deepen instead of burn out. Let's talk about something rarely discussed honestly: detachment without withdrawal. Healthy detachment is not indifference, it is wholeness. It is knowing that your life has meaning with or without her, and choosing her anyway. Younger women feel this difference immediately. When your happiness does not depend on her behavior, your presence becomes grounding instead of heavy, and grounding presence is magnetic. Another powerful shift is learning to lead with curiosity instead of assumption. Older men sometimes believe experience gives them certainty, but certainty closes doors. Curiosity opens them. When you stay curious about her thoughts, her boundaries, her inner world, you signal respect. Respect sustains attraction longer than intensity ever will. Now listen carefully, because this is the recalibration most men need. You do not need to impress a younger woman. You need to invite her. Invite her into your life, not into a performance. Invite her into your values, not your wounds. Invite her into your direction, not your doubts. Invitation feels spacious. Pressure feels heavy. Attraction always chooses space. Another truth that changes everything: consistency beats chemistry over time. Initial chemistry can spark interest, but consistency builds trust. When your words, actions, tone, and availability align, her nervous system stops scanning for danger. And when that happens, desire becomes effortless. This is why emotional maturity is so attractive. It removes confusion. Let's also correct a damaging myth. Being hard to read does not equal depth. Depth comes from clarity, not obscurity. When you are clear about who you are, what you want, and how you feel, without oversharing or withholding, you create emotional transparency. Transparency builds intimacy. Intimacy sustains attraction. Here is something I want you to hear without defensiveness. Younger women are not looking for a man to save them. They are looking for a man who has saved himself, a man who has faced his patterns, a man who has learned from his relationships instead of resenting them, a man who doesn't punish the present for the sins of the past. That man feels rare, and rarity is attractive. When you stop viewing younger women as fragile, unpredictable, or fleeting, and start seeing them as emotionally intelligent individuals responding to energy, everything shifts. You stop performing, you stop proving, you start relating, and that is where attraction stabilizes. Let me give you one final psychological truth that ties this all together. Attraction does not grow from trying to be chosen. It grows when you are choosing from a grounded place, when you know your standards, when you honor your boundaries, when you allow interest to develop naturally, when you walk away from what doesn't align, calmly, without bitterness. That energy communicates self-respect, and self-respect is universally attractive. So before this video ends, I want you to reflect honestly on this. Which habit you heard today do you recognize in yourself the most? And more importantly, what would change in your dating life if you released it? Answer that in the comments, write it out, Make it real. If this video gave you clarity you weren't expecting, like it. Subscribe if you want deeper psychological truths that most men never hear. And share this with a friend who needs to stop sabotaging attraction without realizing it. Because the moment you stop fighting who you are and start standing firmly in yourself, age stops being a liability and becomes your quiet advantage.